Hello and welcome back to the State of Education, presented by One Room Education. I'm Katie, and today I am joined by our lovely part-time co-host who is about ready to have her little one. So I'm not sure if this is going to be the last episode with her for a little while, but we're all very excited. So our part-time co-host, Amanda. Hey, honey.
Hi, it's good to be back. Yeah, I'm like, is this going to be the last one? I don't know. We'll see.
We will see. Today we're going to be diving in to a topic that we have been talking about quite a bit over on the website. And actually, Amanda is currently working on the third article in this series where she is actually keeping up with what is going on in the schools due to COVID policy. So for those of you who don't remember, in 2020, there was a COVID-19 pandemic and pretty much the entire world shut down. And we are just now in June. During the time of this recording, it is June 1st for recording. We are just now starting to get the numbers back on the ways, all the different ways that this is affecting our students. And we talk a lot on this podcast about how numbers are great and how different strategy implementation to kind of curb the effects of this stuff is great in theory. But with education specifically, it is so important to do this stuff in a timely manner because every year of learning that's lost is just a number on a spreadsheet. But to me and Amanda, I know that for us specifically, each one of those years lost is a year of a kid's life that they're never going to get back. And how are we going to be able to help them? Because going over the numbers is one thing, but being able to understand the people and the students and the children behind those numbers, I think is very important. And that's what Amanda masterfully breaks down for us in these articles. And I asked her to do an update for this series because I knew that the new numbers were going to be coming out, and the numbers are rough.
A little bit scary.
Yeah. So let's look at just a quick overview. So currently at the time of recording of this episode, this article has not been published, but it should be published by the time this episode releases. So we will have that linked in the notes and references, as always, in the description of this episode and over on the notes and references pages on one-roomeducation.com. So let's look at this paragraph from the draft that you sent me. What do these results tell us? According to Peggy Carr, Commissioner of the National Center of Education Statistics, a 1 to 2 point decline indicates a significant impact on a student's academic achievement, and a 10-point drop or gain equals about a year's worth of learning. Math scores on this study showed an 8-point drop overall. A decrease of this size has never before been seen in this assessment. Several school districts experienced drops greater than 10 points. Now, let me reiterate, 10 points for these test scores equals about a year of schooling. So there's a decrease of 10 points. So can you break that down a little bit for us, Amanda, and let our listeners know
that's
what's
really
going on?
significant. And this was, let me see here. So this was an assessment looking at 4th and 8th grade students. It hadn't been done since 2019 because of the pandemic, and this was done early 2022. And yeah, they basically said it was like the biggest decrease ever on this assessment, which is definitely concerning and shows that even though like everyone was, making the best of the situation we were in, like clearly it wasn't enough. Like it wasn't keeping students, like it wasn't letting them stay status quo through all the changes and all of the switching to virtual or not having the staff, having more of the learning being done at home, whatever the variables were. That's a year's worth of learning that was lost in that time frame. And, and then it's like how do you correct that is a whole other issue. But this is definitely showing that what, at least some people thought that there is going to be some negative impacts to children's education.
And that's the paragraph immediately preceding that states no state demonstrated any improvements in their test scores. Overall, get this, people, ready? Are you ready for this? I was reading this. Like, did you see the comments I made on this, Amanda? I was like, holy crap. Oh my God. So this one really, perk your ears up, people. Are you ready for this? Overall, reading scores dropped to what they were in 1992, and math scores showed their largest decrease ever. So that's what, almost 30 years of learning loss there? Or 92, that's
crazy.
That's 30 years ago.
Yeah, it is.
That's the lowest score in 30 years. Now, you and I have talked about like No Child Left Behind a little bit in some other episodes. We have a couple articles coming out about that here pretty soon, and the impact that had on the education system just in general. But the scores didn't really go down that much during the No Child Left Behind era. But this is ridiculous. So
I thought it was interesting, a paragraph a little bit lower that said it was a different study, but they said, like, to put into context the results, that the decrease in the math scores were significantly larger than the estimated impacts from other disruptions, like after Hurricane Katrina.
That one really got me too. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, for people that are listening to this that might not remember, because I have a really hard time realizing that people that were born in like the early 2000s when we were in high school are like adults now listening to this. So for people that don't remember Hurricane Katrina, what was that, 2005? Something like that?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
4 or 5,
even
something
know.
like that.
I guess it was a while ago now.
It was a Category 5 hurricane that hit New Orleans, Louisiana, hit Louisiana and the whole Louisiana coast of the United States, and it wrecked everything. And it was at least 8 months that those kids were displaced. So with losing their homes, losing their families, losing everything that they ever had, and not being able to go to school, that had less of an impact than distance learning during COVID.
Wow.
Would that be a safe analysis of what you just said?
Yeah, I think that's what they're saying. Yeah.
Okay.
And I feel like,
Cool.
You'll hear people a lot of times say like, oh, kids are resilient. I feel like I hear that a lot, like they're fine.
It's fine. We can do whatever we want. They're right. Kids. They're resilient. Yeah, it'll be fine.
And it's like, I mean, kids are adaptable, but at the same time, like they need the tools, and they're not adults. Like they don't know how to, I don't know. Like they can adapt if we show them how to adapt.
Yes, exactly.
They're not just naturally gonna know how to be like, oh, I didn't learn this skill, so I'm gonna find a way to do it in a different way. Like that's not gonna happen. So, this is kind of showing that, there has to be some guidance and assistance here. We can't just like pull skills away and then expect them to just naturally gain those skills on their own,
Right, absolutely. Because a lot of times, especially whenever you're looking at the younger kids, like these test scores are. Usually, I think you said specifically in this article, it's grades 4 and 8.
Hmm.
So those are younger kids. They don't even know that those coping mechanisms are there to look for them.
No.
So kids have this amazing ability to internalize things and try to figure out why they're broken and why they can't just deal with stuff. And I think that one of two things happens whenever big events like this occur in the world. One, kids are resilient, they'll be fine. Don't worry about it at all. Or it goes into like this coddling baby mode where it becomes like bulldozer parenting by everybody to protect the kids. Like, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
neither one of those are healthy. And I feel like school districts are either completely ignoring the issue, and parents, school districts and parents are either completely ignoring the issue and acting like it didn't happen, or they are going so overboard with the social emotional side of stuff that it's taking away from what school is actually supposed to be.
Hmm.
So it's like there is no
Right.
middle of the road that I see right now. I don't know if you
Not
see a middle of
really.
the road with it.
No. And I mean, I don't know. Like when I think of, oh, kids being adaptable, to me, it's more like they're going to try to like fit in or minimize anything that they is hard.
Hmm.
They're not going to adapt by like gaining that skill in a different way.
Right.
They're going to maybe they'll kind of like go under the radar because people don't notice because they're
Hmm.
kind of trying to like minimize that. But that's maybe how they're going to adapt to their environment in that way.
Yeah.
Um and I think, like you said, it kind of goes one way or the other. And I think in my area, so if you listen to the other episodes, I'm a speech pathologist, and I feel like we just end up getting more referrals for kids because the kids didn't get, skills that pretty much most kids would learn,
Hmm.
through school or home. They just haven't been getting. So then it's just going to end up being more students referred for special education that, prior to COVID-19, like they probably wouldn't have needed that.
Right.
And so, yeah.
And if you want to learn more about that type of stuff, the special ed referrals and what Amanda actually does, because as she mentioned, she is not a classroom teacher. She works with teachers and students as a speech pathologist, what do you call yourself?
Speech pathologist, speech therapist, either
Okay.
one is fine.
We explain all of that in the intro to Amanda episode. It's titled "What is SLP?" or "What is an SLP?" and other resource staff. I'll make sure that that's linked in the description here under related listens, so that you can get a really in-depth idea of what Amanda's talking about there with referrals and the system or parents trying to use resource staff like Amanda to fix an issue that they can't handle either because there's so many kids affected by this. Would you say that's a fair statement?
Yeah, for sure.
So have you seen an increase like this school year specifically? Have you seen an increase in the amount of referrals that you've been getting for the the speech or social end of things related to something that you would see as like COVID related,
Mhm.
if that makes
Well,
sense?
I feel like I'm not sure, but I have seen like for some students that have been referred or um the school is kind of questioning. Sometimes it like the staff or the parents will say, well, you know, COVID, the pandemic kind of started when they were in preschool or kindergarten, and, you know, they were home a lot of those years.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was like different teachers coming in and out and all these things. So that, like, maybe by the time I see them and they're in like second grade or something now, they're all kind of wondering if the reasons that they're looking at an evaluation with me is because of all those things that happened in the previous years. Like they didn't have the normal, you know, kindergarten through the other years, the normal school experience that the
Mm.
other students did. So I think um I know, I'm trying to think. It's like hard to say if I've had more or it's just like the ones that I do have, that seems to be a big factor. Even the
Okay.
older students, because like some of them, like most of their high school was disrupted.
Hmm.
And now it's like, are they ready to graduate with the skills that they need? You
Mm.
know, because they
Did,
didn't really have them.
did you see the, speaking of graduating with skills they need, did you see the news that came out about the Texas school that,
No, I don't think so.
so they have, it's a small rural school district and they have 33 seniors and only 5 of them qualified to graduate.
Whoa, I did not see that.
So they're postponing graduation for everybody to try to get, yeah, to try to get them
What?
qualified.
Wow. Okay. For like a whole year or like
I have
don't
no
know.
idea.
Okay.
I have no clue what
Crazy.
they're doing, but I'm keeping an eye on that like in the background to figure
Yeah.
out like
Wow.
that is just, and people will say, "Oh, it's a rural Texas school. Of course the yokels can't graduate from high school or whatever." But like this isn't just happening. Like this school is the one that made news.
And it sounds like it's not like this was going on before. It's not like it was a common thing. Like obviously
Right.
this is, and that makes sense because this would be like they would have been early high school when this all
Right, they would
happened.
have been
So
freshmen when all this
interesting.
started. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Mhm. So,
Yikes.
yeah, all the stuff that you and I have been talking about in the background, like with all of these with the pandemic articles that you've been doing, and a lot of the articles that you've written, not necessarily the podcast episodes that we've done, like a little bit of that, but definitely the articles. You and I talk so much whenever we're planning articles because we come up, like, we just vibe really well. We have a ton of ideas that come up for content whenever we're just talking. And a lot of the stuff we've talked about is that we were worried about as educators.
Right.
We're seeing come to fruition now, and it is really scary because
Sad.
that is a group of kids that are screwed
Mm.
because of adult knee-jerk reactions to something.
Right.
And pretty much anything that we talk about here on the State of Education podcast has to do with adult reactions to things that affect our kids, our students. So, let's, with that in mind, let's hop back to the first article that you did on this topic. So, back in early 2022, there was a news report that I saw that was talking about something called the COVID speech delay. And I was like, that's really interesting because it was saying that kids, like toddlers, that were not, they didn't have any cognitive delays necessarily, were exhibiting signs and symptoms adjacent to autism. And I brought that report to you, and you seemed very interested in it. And you said that you had seen similar things and you had talked to some of your colleagues about similar issues that you were starting to see with younger and younger kids, specifically in the speech category, because that's a large part of what you do as a speech therapist, right? Speech, language. So, if you could give people just sort of an overview about what the COVID speech delay is and what that does. So this is going to be in reference to the COVID speech delay in kids article over on One Dash Room Education that was written by Amanda, and it was published on July 21st of 2022.
Wow, almost a
So
year ago already.
I know, I saw that and I
That's
was like, was
crazy.
that really that long ago?
I guess. Yeah.
Yes. So we've been covering this for a full year here at One Room Education because Amanda and I were like, this is going to be a much bigger issue than people think it is.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
if you could just kind of give people an overview of what it is, what you were seeing, what made you concerned enough to agree to write an article, just like that kind of stuff.
Sure. Well, yeah, like you said, when you sent me that article, it was, yeah, I thought it was interesting. And I had had colleagues reaching out to each other, saying, like, wondering if other speech therapists were seeing things and asking questions about their own kids who were born during the pandemic. Um, and like wondering, and a lot of people chimed in and were seeing similar things. So basically, um, we kind of just were looking at, did the pandemic affect speech and language development, especially in young children? Because, there's key developmental milestones and a lot of that for
Hmm.
those things for speech and language. And like a lot of it, the biggest growth is at like, very young ages, like before preschool.
Hmm.
And so a lot of this was for, thinking about students born like just before or during the pandemic and looking at if that impacted their development of those skills. And um, I definitely found information that it it did and or it could for sure impact a lot of different areas. So like some of the areas that I looked at were vocabulary development. So a lot of that comes from at a young age, like before you're, learning vocabulary in school or like in books and things like that. Obviously, they're still learning it through books at a young age, but a lot of it too is through different activities, going to things in your community, seeing family members, like, yeah, just learning what things are by seeing and doing.
Hmm.
And obviously, with a lot of the shutdowns, kids weren't getting out and doing a lot of those things. So the only way they were being exposed was by their immediate family members at home, who a lot of them were trying to work from home, like work with their other older kids to do school. So a lot of kids probably spent a lot of time on devices or kind of left to do their own thing. Um, at least probably more than they would have in the past. Um, so then, their world gets smaller, so their exposure to different vocabulary is just not going to be as robust. So, um, it's, that could definitely impact their vocabulary development, which is going to impact them when they do start reading and when they do start school. Um, it's just going to make that a lot more challenging. And then as far as like speech skills specifically, so thinking about the sounds of words and the pronunciation of those sounds, a big thing that came up was the masks because, um, you know, a lot of how we learn as a young child how to produce sounds is seeing them. So, that, and there some teachers or people would try to do things with like the plastic masks that you can see through but they kind of fog up and it's
Yeah.
it's not the greatest. um and so they something the studies I looked at, they were seeing um yeah children mixing up different sounds or like not being really clear with their pronunciation. It reduces the volume and the clarity too.
Hmm.
And then that has a lot to do with like phonics, phonological awareness, which impacts reading and spelling and writing. Like
Hmm.
it impacts a lot of future academic skills. So that was another concern. And also looked at, like the social skills. And a lot of that is nonverbal. So not just what we say, but like how we say it. And if you're not seeing people, if you get a text or an email, you don't get the full context.
Yeah.
There's a lot of misinterpretations in those kind of scenarios, that you think it's coming across one way and the person who sent it meant it a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, kids, weren't seeing people. So they're not seeing like body language, gestures, facial expressions, like the way that people communicate things, which helps you interpret like jokes, sarcasm,
Mm-hmm.
emotions. And so they, were seeing that students, like, yeah, they're really struggling to interpret all of those we call like, nonverbal language. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then again, the masks, like if you can't see someone's full face, you're only getting like half of the picture.
Mm-hmm.
And so not only are they having trouble interpreting, but then like, do they know what it looks like to be mad or happy? Like, do they know how to express that if they're never seeing it modeled or only by like the two or three people in their environment?
Right.
And so they were seeing too in one of the studies, a lot of people or a lot of kids, when they did return to school, didn't know how to appropriately express themselves. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot more behaviors because they may not have the language or the words or the sounds to say it, first of all, and they don't know how to socially express themselves appropriately. So, you know, plus all the changes, closures, schedule changes, um, different routines at home, things like, tantrums, students picking on each other, like taking things from peers, all of those things were increasing because like students didn't know what to do and they didn't see appropriate social interactions
Mm-hmm.
or have the opportunity to be in situations where they had to kind of problem solve things or be around other kids where you have to like navigate and negotiate like
Mm-hmm.
this is my toy, okay, we can share things like that. Like they need to be exposed to those things to learn how to cope. And then if they haven't, we're seeing almost like behavior you would expect in a much younger child by
Mm-hmm.
the time they get to school because they probably haven't been around other kids unless siblings, if they have siblings. So a lot of teachers were having a lot of issues with, more classroom management skills and a lot more immature behavior than you would expect. Almost like, you're kind of scaling back what you're doing in the classroom and focusing more on that than academics because they need to learn how to interact and you got to, really have to go back to those basics. So, yeah, and all of those like fall under speech and language. So, those are all things that I would work on. But again, like if every child is coming with some of these issues, it's like every child could need these services, but it's more like they don't have the foundation because they didn't have that exposure and then they're having to be explicitly directly taught these skills where if they had had more of a normal environment growing up where they could go out and do things and see other kids and see relatives, a lot of that is learned what we call implicitly, like just through observation, through their natural environment. Like I don't usually have to like, you know, sit down and tell a 2-year old, you know, how to do some of these things. I mean, some, yeah, like some ways to interact with peers, you have to kind of teach them. But a lot of it, they just learn through doing and seeing and experience. And kids, they learn through play, right? But they didn't have that. So, yeah, there's definitely going to be more concerns and more teaching that needs to be done once they get to school, which, like I said, is going to take away from the academic time. So it's kind of all just cyclical because then the teachers get behind on the academics because you got to address this before you can, I don't know. Yeah. So, and that was a year ago. So it'd be interesting. I'm sure there's been more more information out now too that we'll see as it, as if the years go by.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, and one of the things I think of too is that so many so many of these skills are foundational. Well, really at any age. There are like certain foundational skills that like at each age you're kind of expected to learn
Mhm.
that you build on. And so like thinking of those new studies that we were just talking about, looking at how, you know, some skills students might be a year behind. And I'm just, how do you catch up? Because it's not just that year. It's not just
Right.
that skill because that builds on every skill every year in the future that I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah, and that's the
it's hard.
problem. That
Right.
that's the problem right there because we we understand as a society that you start at a base level like blank slate and then you build your Lego blocks, right? And if you miss a block in the middle, it's going to make the structure weaker. And the understanding that that student that's missing the blocks in their structure has of the world will be skewed from how other people see it. And that misinterpretation of the world around them, I think, especially for like somebody like me that's a secondary teacher that teaches uh, more abstract ideas as opposed to like hard science, hard like here's the answer, there is
Mm.
like there is an answer to it kind of thing. The the ability of these kids coming up through the grades of them to be able to understand and evaluate critically these more abstract adult type topics that will either help or hinder their adult lives, I think is what I'm particularly looking at being concerned with. So, pretty much everybody that listens to the podcast knows at this point that I have a toddler. He was planned. It was a planned baby, but it ended up being at the pandemic shutdowns happened like right after I found out I was pregnant.
Of course.
And he was born in December of 2020. So all of the stuff that you just talked about is stuff that I've been seeing going along this whole time. And you and I talked about this whenever we were first brainstorming for this series for one room education and focusing specifically on the pandemic policies and the effect that it's having on kids from zero clear up through any college. And you mentioned in this article, specifically on the COVID speech delays, about how the masking is affecting older adults too. And how it's not just affecting the youngest among us, it's affecting the oldest among us too, which I thought was a really interesting take on it because that's something that's not really being addressed. It's being swept under the rug almost harder than than the effect on kids. Um, but since I had my son in December of 2020, I was able to see the effects of the way that my husband and I chose to do things versus the way that other people that just went along with the policies and didn't question them, how their kids of the same age range and just kind of comparing them. And I understand every child develops at their own rate, and you should never compare children or siblings and blah, 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 whatever. That's what all these numbers are. They're comparing kids of the same age to each other. So why can't I do it, right? So one of the main things that I noticed whenever I saw this first news report and I brought this to you, what really hit home with me was my son was a year and a half when we talked about doing this article. Yeah, right around a year and a half when this article on one room education first came out. And what I was noticing was that whenever we would go out right? Whenever we would go to a restaurant or something. Our son, he was just like a normal kid. Do you know what I mean? Like he
And
just
he like probably looked like the star of the show because
Oh, he did. Oh my God, it was
yeah.
horrible. He hams stuff up so bad. But like he would try to interact with the waitresses or the servers. He would interact with the old people, right? And
Yeah.
he would try to interact with other kids. And these other kids, and mind you, my son was
He was advanced. He looked advanced,
right.
probably. Right.
He looked like a 4 or 5-year-old around these other kids that were about his age. They just were having like full on meltdowns like he did when he was like 4 or 5 months old. When you'll find out really soon, when babies get frustrated, all they can do is cry. That's the only way that they can communicate. So
I feel like that sometimes.
Me too. I do
Especially
that sometimes. Ask my husband. He'll be like, sometimes Katie just cries. That's all she can do. But these kids that should have had some sort of any other form of communication by a year and a half, even if it's just pointing at what they want, that's a form of communication. Not everybody's going to teach their kids sign language like we did, which, by the way, huge parenting hack. If you're having a baby, teach them the basic sign language of drink and food and milk and please.
And side note, as a speech therapist, a lot of people think they shouldn't or are concerned because they think it'll take away from speech development. And I'm going to tell you that is not true. So sign language all the way. It's good. It's a good thing.
And you say the word as you're doing the sign language for it. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like the bilingual thing that bilingual parents do.
And it gives them a mode of communication before they can use words. So
it avoided so many tantrums.
Exactly.
Like I credit toddler sign language with us avoiding the majority of tantrums.
It's great.
But it was just really interesting to see him next to kids his age and seeing not only how the child acted, and even like now he's 2.5. Oh my God, he's 2.5. And he acts like a little like teenager. It's ridiculous. But seeing him still at 2.5 around kids his own age, he just seems more mature. And I don't know if that's because he just spends more time with mommy and daddy, because I am a stay-at-home mom, like officially, like that's technically what I do. Or if it's because, you and I have talked, my husband and I refuse to mask. I have asthma. My husband has issues. We were not required to mask. And, we're citizens of the United States. Make me. Sorry, not sorry. But we refused to mask. And if somewhere didn't like that was fine. We didn't yell at anybody. We just went somewhere else. And the people that my son did interact with were so warm and welcoming. And everybody said, oh my God, it's so nice to see a normal kid. And that particular phrase, it's so nice to see a normal kid. We heard that so much. And even now, 2.5 years later, we're still hearing that. Like he's just so normal. And I'm like, well, what's that say about all the other kids that have had to go through this and how they're doing mentally and emotionally and cognitively and all that stuff. And so on top of my husband and I choosing not to mask and going places that were okay with that and allowed that, and we never really quit visiting family after like the first 2 months. We would go and visit family, or they would come to our house. We did it safely, like whatever, but we chose to live as normal of life as we could. And I think that really reflects in the way that our son is. And seeing the way that kids wanted to talk to my son, and other little kids, very young children, wanted to see the baby, wanted to talk to the baby, wanted to touch the baby. And my husband and I were okay with that. But seeing the fear in the other kids' parent about what, like that fear, and the kids were confused about why the parent was afraid, and
Yeah.
they would like throw a mask on the little kid. Like, there is nothing sadder to me than seeing a 2-year-old with a mask on. Like, absolutely so sad to me. And then that little kid has no idea what anyone with a mask on is saying. And I just thought that was interesting that you talked so much about the masking end of it, and then how that the mask specifically, everything else ripples out from the mask. And I didn't really realize that, like, it's one of those things, like, all these things, and then you put it
Yeah,
together, and I
but
was
you
like,
don't
oh
really
crap, yeah,
think
that's
about
true.
it and how all the different impacts, right?
Hmm.
Like how much we rely on that visual aspect and auditory. It affects visual and auditory. Yeah.
Right. And you and I talked also that my dad has been hard of hearing his whole life, and he relies heavily on lip reading. And when everybody was wearing masks all the time, he would be like, I don't understand what you're saying. Can you please pull your mask down so I can see what you're saying? And people refused to do it. They would rather somebody not be able to participate in society because they're hard of hearing than show some human compassion, is the way I saw it. But I don't know. Yeah, so we'll make sure to have this article linked. All 3 of these articles that we're talking about today will be linked in the notes. So let's go ahead and look at the article that we published in October of last year. It's called Social Delays After the COVID-19 Pandemic. And this is one that Amanda also wrote because she's our resident COVID pandemic policies
Who
effect
knew?
on kids specialist, I guess that's a long title, but there you go. You now have it.
Awesome.
Yay.
Oh.
So I loved that you opened this article with a quote. Social interaction is fundamental to the human experience. And it's so true. Like, how many people got so depressed,
Yeah.
and the increase in psychiatric medication prescriptions was something like 200-fold during and after the pandemic. And there's a stat that I've been talking about a lot on social media, and I'm also over on an app called Wisdom app, and it's kind of like everybody has a radio show that you can call into, kind of, is how I describe it. And I'm over there. I'm on there all the time. I do a live show over there. I call it the Daily Dose of the State of Education, and it's just stuff I see, and then I rant about it, and then we can talk about it. But it's fun, so you can follow me over there. I'll leave the link in the description of this episode. But one of the things I've been mentioning over there and on our other social medias is that a new survey came out that said that 50% of high schoolers are on some sort of antidepressant or anti-anxiety medicine. And at least 50% of those kids admitted to having suicidal ideologies since the pandemic. And that's only since the pandemic. So I think that directly relates to this social delays article that you did. And you and I talked a while ago that depression and anxiety were going to increase in students. And I don't know about you, I'm kind of getting tired of being right about the sad and depressing things.
Right? It's true.
But it's something that I think we both think is very important to touch on, because the mental health of our kids and our students is going to be the mental health of the nation. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was, as I'm looking at that article about the social delays, yeah, that I talked a little bit about the older population, like you said, and then there was what you were saying, it made me think of. I found in my research something called the principle of double effect,
Mm-hmm.
so this was like, basically, we saw this during the pandemic, and this principle says that causing harm is allowed in order to and as a result of doing something beneficial. So, like typically doctors have the in their what is it like the Hippocratic
Yeah, the
oath,
Hippocratic Oath.
do no harm. But in this case, it was like that basically was put aside, knowing that there was going to be negative side effects because of the like intervention that was put into practice. So, in this case, like the social isolation was put into practice to try to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in order to like contain the virus, even though there would be undesirable isolation.
Right.
But like you said, as we're seeing, this negative effect is bad. You know, like it's I don't know what they were expecting, but and then it's like you said, it's affecting not just students, but like elderly as well. And they're seeing like a lot of like the mental health, but also leading to physical health issues
Hmm.
because it's all connected. And, you know, some of these elderly people, like, that's what their days would be like seeing, you know, trying to see other people and interact or have family visit. So if that is all taken away, I mean, that's going to really impact their quality of life. Um,
Right.
and, you know, obviously we're seeing it in students and children as well at all ages. Um, and so, yeah, it's sad. Like you said, it's like, who wants to be right about this kind of thing? It's not, it's sad. And it's like these things are ongoing. Like, it's not
Hmm.
like an easy, it's not like, oh, as soon as people started doing things again, like those numbers flipped and
Right.
everyone was fine. It's not that simple.
Right. And I think that one of the best examples that I can think of late has been the outbursts of kids in the classroom and their inability to control their outbursts and their inability to control any sort of negative emotion. And I think that that's fueled by the anxiety and specifically, if you follow me on Twitter over at one room underscore ed, I've shared quite a few videos that have surfaced of students physically or verbally assaulting teachers and other staff that try to take away their phones. And I think one, phones are an issue. Why are they in school? Let's have that conversation. That's a conversation for another day. But we as a society need to have a question as to why you need a computer in your lap, in your pocket, 24/7, and how that's addictive. That is an addiction and a way for kids to deal with anxiety and depression. So it's like a binky, right?
And it's
A
not really
pacifier.
developmentally appropriate a lot of times, I think,
Right,
either.
right. Did
But,
you see,
anyways,
did you see the teacher that literally got pepper sprayed in the face by one of his female students for taking her cell
no.
phone? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So a
Well,
lot of things led to that, like lack of enforcement of rules, leniency on a whole lot of levels,
hmm
parental involvement, pretty much all the stuff we talk about here on the state of
right.
education culminates in teachers getting punched in the face and pepper sprayed in the hallway for trying to enforce the rules, right? So, but one of the things I think is the social issue where it's the lack of skills that these students learn to cope with literally anything. If they were having a bad day, they would just get on TikTok or they would get on any other social media platform and they would post and they would try to get that dopamine hit, right? And they got so used to being able to do that because if the kid has the cell phone, then they're leaving the parent alone that's trying to do work from home. And it just, everything builds on top of everything else. And then you try to put these kids who have been through so much already with the pandemic policies back into a classroom and say, here, have a normal life now. Good luck. That's not how that works. And this is going to sound like an extreme comparison, but bear with me for a second. So, my husband is a veteran. He's a U.S. Army veteran. And we were talking the other day about how it's so hard for service people coming home from a conflict zone to just turn off that switch and just go back into life, right? They spend 6 to 8 weeks of boot camp tearing them down and building them back up in a way that they're able to do these horrendous things that are required in war. And then whenever you come home, it's just, here you go, good luck, have fun. Like, you're expected to just flip all of that off and go back to normal life. And I feel like that's what they did with these kids. They terrorized them with constant propaganda. Their parents didn't know what to do. They were in constant states of fear. They created a lack of understanding of what real social interaction looks like for young children. And they created a dependency of acceptance from an authority in these children. And then they put them back in school and expected them to act normal. Well, quote unquote normal. And I see a lot of similarities there. People aren't going to like that comparison, I don't think. But just because I'm kind of in both worlds there, I see a lot of similarities. And then the kids lash out in very stereotypical post-traumatic stress symptomatic ways, but like classic PTSD symptoms. And that's just not being addressed. It ends up being a behavioral issue, or it ends up being something else, or they end up getting referred to you for whatever. And the actual issue isn't being addressed. And the parents don't know how to address it. So, because they've been through it too, but they don't know how to handle it themselves, or what they've been through. Nobody, unless you're in this type of field like you and I are, where we're constantly critically evaluating what's going on socially and politically and academically, like we're in a very specific pigeonhole over here, and a rabbit hole. We're in our own little rabbit hole over here. And unless this type of stuff is brought to the attention of, like, quote unquote normal people, then I don't see that this is going to get better. But good news, we're bringing it to people's attention. So we can talk about it. We can have open conversations about how people feel violated, how people have been through a traumatic experience, and then how to help. I think if you help the parents and the other adults, then they'll be able to help the kids, because you can't help somebody else if you're screwed up yourself. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you're in it yourself, you can't help somebody else out of it.
Yeah. And I think, like, none of this is saying, like, we're not trying to be like, oh, people, parents or teachers, like, did all these things wrong. A lot of, like, most of this was out of our hands, and everyone was trying to navigate this unforeseen, once in a lifetime,
Right.
not even a lifetime situation that nobody knew what to do, right? It changed every day. The policies, I remember, like, it was like the policies changed so often. It was hard to keep up, and then so many changes that it's like living in that kind of instability for that amount of time is just like, it's not good. It impacts everybody. So, a lot of parents were doing the best they could to juggle work and home and kids and school and like, taking it a day at a time, basically, like everybody. And teachers too, like, were forced to adapt and teach in different ways that they never signed up for. And
Right.
so this is not, we're not like blaming anyone or,
Right.
it's just this is what happened. And now, um, these are the ramifications, sadly, of
Hmm.
all of those things. Um, but like you said, like just helping us become aware is the next, is the hopefully the first step in, making some positive changes. Because a lot of these things, like, yeah, like we said, you probably never had to think about a lot of
Hmm.
this so intentionally and like specifically before because this wasn't like, who would have ever thought we would be dealing with like this kind of a thing
Right.
ever? So it's new. It's like we're still just starting. Like you said, these studies are just coming out. We're still just starting to see what the effects are. I mean, it's sad that like we have to learn these things after the
Hmm.
fact that it's like, well, now this has already happened. But, we can take this information and try to make positive changes as much as we can within our means because yeah, it was a tough situation for everybody and everyone was
Hmm.
affected in some way, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things where I think that people realized where they were in life, for better or worse. Because before COVID, you could cover everything up kind of, and you could lie to yourself as much as you wanted to just get by, if that makes sense. If we're talking like specifically about emotional stuff.
Right. That is
And
true.
when when all of the distractions went away, at the end of the day, you had to sit with yourself and the people that you chose to surround yourself with. And I think that that was very hard for a lot of people to realize where they were, who they were with, situations that they had created for themselves, and having to face those head on. And I'm sure that you're aware the divorce rate jumped like ridiculous during the pandemic. And I think it was because there were these broken relationships that were just kind of surviving on life support where they didn't have to see each other too much because they could work and just, hang out with friends and not have to be around each other too much. But when everything shut down, they really had to evaluate whether
Right.
the relationship was working for everyone anymore. So that jumped. So on top of everything else you have going on, you have a lot of families breaking up,
Right.
and the emotional and social stress that that puts on a kid anyways, and the fact that
Mhm.
they didn't have any sort of support system to help guide them through that other than the parents that didn't like each other and were getting divorced
Right.
anyways.
Like who are the parents who are dealing with their own stuff. So
Right.
really hard, like you said, hard to help your kids with something when you're dealing with something heavy and you don't even know how to interpret. Yeah.
Right.
And it's
And
like one of those things where like you said, it kind of brought things down to the open and also showed like those situations where you pick the easy in the short term and then in the long
mhm.
term it's not so easy.
Yeah.
Like, like a child, like it's easier to give in to the tantrum and like give them what they want. But,
Mhm.
we know in the long run that's not good.
Right.
And so, you know, in some ways, okay, it was probably easy to like you said, like not think about any issues at home or during the pandemic, like it's easy in some ways, like it might have been easier to I don't know, not have to like go do all these things or not have to interact with people outside your home that maybe like you were tricky relationships. But
Mhm.
then especially for kids, they need to be put in those situations to learn. And so that's like you said, then when they are back in the classroom, they never had to learn how to have a conversation or resolve a disagreement or deal with mean or rude people.
Right.
And it was easier, but at the same time, like it didn't benefit them.
Right. That's
because
not
they
real
don't know
life.
what to do. Yeah.
Yeah. People are going to yell at you if you work in customer service. That's just how it is.
Right.
People are going to be rude. People are going to be awesome sometimes and make your day. But knowing how to deal with all those different types of people is extremely important. And I think you're right. I think that that's a key thing with a lot of these issues that you're seeing in school now is partially it's cultural, obviously. Like I've talked about this a little bit on the Daily Dose that I do over on the Wisdom app about that a lot of these school fights and a lot of it being acceptable to be violent towards adults, that these types of things are encouraged by peers. I mean, does no one read Lord of the Flies anymore? Like, literally, is that not a thing anymore? Read Lord of the Flies if you're going to be a parent or if you are in education. And then tell me that you want to send your kid to public school. Just saying. It's Lord of the Flies with a couple adults saying, "Hey, you might not want to do that." You know, that sounds a little extreme, but you know it's true. And it's just that these kids didn't have to. You're right. These kids didn't have to interact with each other and learn that violent outbursts and just hitting somebody is not really a great way to make it in society long term. And I think that a lot of parents tried. You're right. A lot of parents tried their hardest. They were doing the best they could. There was a lot of fear that was going around. And parents did do the best they could with what they had. I think they, by and large, they tried to. And that is evident by the homeschooling rate increasing to anywhere between 11 to 15%, depending on where it is. They just can't quite get a pin on that number yet. Whether it's 11 or 15% of the total school age population of the United States is currently in some form of home-based education, post-pandemic, because parents realized, oh shit, these people have no idea what they're doing half the time. In school, they're dealing more with these kids that are having these emotional and behavioral outbursts instead of helping my kid learn something. And yeah, is the quote unquote socialization that my kid is supposed to be receiving at public school really worth everything else? You know what I mean? And that got critically evaluated. And I'm very happy to see that parents on all political spectrums now, because homeschooling was seen as just like a conservative, far right wing kind of thing. And it's now being seen as an alternative for anyone who thinks that their kid deserves better. And I really, that I've talked about this, that's just the point of homeschooling. Is that you think that your kid deserves better, you think that you can do better, awesome, let's do it. And yeah, and as well as I do that does not lead to a lack of socialization.
Right.
It leads to different socialization.
Yeah, not just with all peers your same age, which actually is not how life looks. So
right. So tell me from a professional standpoint, speech therapist, is it better for toddlers to be around a whole bunch of toddlers to learn how to use their THs and their Fs, or is it better for them to be around adults who know the difference?
Since a lot of young kids are not actually producing that sound correctly yet, then probably some older people mixed in there would be helpful.
Okay. Just thought that I would verify that, make sure it wasn't just like a me making assumptions thing.
No.
Yeah, there for like a couple weeks my son was saying truck, but it wasn't coming out that way. So we worked really hard for a couple weeks on the truck sound.
And then you have to try really hard not to like overreact, because then it's like this becomes this thing, and
because then it's funny, and then he just wants to do it more.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Okay. So exposure to all age groups is better than exposure to single age groups from a speech and social therapy standpoint. Would that be fair to say?
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, good. Just throwing that in there. Homeschool plug, what? What about some action steps? So we know that it starts with the parents and the adults having to get out of it themselves so that they can put their hand out and help the kids out of it. So let's start with some things that adults can do. For self-care is such an overused term, but you know what I mean, to help ourselves mentally and emotionally.
Mhm.
And then how we can then let that trickle down to how we interact with our students or our children.
Yeah, I think a lot of them can kind of overlap. Like you said, a lot of things that are going to be beneficial to them are going to be beneficial to you, and vice versa. Things that are helpful to you will just naturally be beneficial to them. So, I mean, things like because of all the disruptions during the shutdown policies and things like that, I think as much as you can have like somewhat of a schedule that's relatively consistent, um, I think it's helpful for kids and adults. That was one of the things I think kids really, they feel that when it's just changing and chaos, and then parents are trying to figure out like childcare, who's doing what, and all of those kinds of things impact everyone. So I think trying to have a schedule, and then, like I said, that helps you, and then like clearly communicating that to your kids and setting up the expectations and letting them know here's what's coming, here's what you can expect.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we just forget that, I don't know, like we don't always involve kids in that, and we just think like, oh, this is our schedule and they'll just come along with it. And I mean, a lot of times they do, but kids benefit from and they like being involved in it. And you can even have them give some input,
Mm-hmm.
of like maybe just give like two choices. Okay, here at this time, do you want to have like snack first, or do you want to play for, or whatever it is? No, that helps them feel more involved and have ownership, but it's still like you are still like controlling the schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to just get back to, yeah, more normalcy, that having a routine can help with that. I also think um, this is something, again, I think it benefits both. Having like healthy ways to communicate your emotions and how you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah, during the pandemic, a lot of it was just like probably, I don't know, emotions were all over the place, right? Like
Yes.
fear, confusion, I don't know, everything. And
Frustration.
yeah, and it changed. And also, kids like were seeing that, but then they also weren't seeing other emotions, and they weren't seeing other people expressing those emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So having healthy ways to express your emotion and then modeling that to your kids so that they know, you know, like I think sometimes we also think we just want to show the positive emotions, like happy, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, we can't be sad or mad because they'll see that. Like they need to see that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good thing, and that's okay. But you can model and just verbalize, like, I'm so frustrated. I thought we were going to do this, but it's raining, so we have to stay home. Or I'm mad. Or, I'm excited because of this, but now I have to wait and I don't want to wait. Like, talk about it, and then, like, pair that with, like, something that you can do. And then, like, that will rub off on them. And then you can talk about it when they're having big emotions, and then talk about something that they can do. And
Mm-hmm.
that's something, again, like that's something you guys can work on together. And, it's just a reminder to you too that like it's okay to feel these things, because I think, yeah, with like all the mental health stuff and all the changes, it's almost like we start to feel guilty too
Mm-hmm.
it's like I have to have it all together, and I have to be this happy, cheery person or this parent for my child. But it's like, no, this was big life altering things going on. Like it was normal to be overwhelmed and feeling a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
So, you don't, you don't want your kids to kind of like hide their emotions either. Um, so that would be one. I think also, I mean, kind of going along with that, but this has to do too with like I guess the expression or like what we were talking about, the increased outward behaviors at school is
Mm-hmm.
um, modeling um, appropriate behaviors and then like affirming those things.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that is going to be, that's just kind of like one way of teaching these skills that, like you said, a lot of students didn't pick up naturally. And at young ages, they learn them through observing and imitating, anyways. So, um, you know, teaching age appropriate things like sharing and taking turns and kind of talking through and having, role playing different scenarios and things like that. And I mean, like, it sounds silly, but a lot of us didn't do a lot of these things either when we were stuck at home, like with adults. So, it's a little practice for all of us in a way. Um, that sort of thing. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, I feel like those would be, like I said, I think those would be helpful for adults and children because,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even though it's like portrayed in different ways, we all went through the same thing and we all in different ways,
Right.
had the same struggles. So it's kind of something that the whole family is going to have to address at their own level,
Right. And
not just kids. So,
I think that that's a really great point that you made, that going through stuff together is okay. And my husband and I have both been working on that a lot. Is if we have a big emotion, saying, Mommy is feeling very frustrated right now, and Mommy needs to take a minute. I will be right back because I'm going to go over there and I'm going to close my eyes for a second, and then I'll be able to calm myself down and I'll be right back. Until then, sit down and be quiet. Like, you know what I mean? And then whenever I come back, I say, this is what happened. This is how Mommy reacted to it. This is what happened. And I don't do that every time. Obviously, that would take up like your entire life.
yeah.
But doing it with the really big emotions that you're feeling, and that's, I love Mr. Rogers. Okay. This is a direct relation.
Yeah.
So we have a book. It's called Fred's Big Feelings. And it talks about Mr. Rogers and how he had big feelings and how he learned to deal with them. And so we say, we're having a big feeling and we need to ride. They're like waves. Big feelings are like waves, and you just got to ride that wave till it's done. Then we can talk, because in the middle of that wave is not a good time to talk. And when my son did start to have like slight tantrums and stuff, he still doesn't have like big tantrums, because my husband and I are very like, as soon as we see something, we try to nip it in the bud. That way it doesn't become a problem. And one of the things we started working on was take a deep breath, or we'll just start counting for him. Everybody says like count to 5, count to 10, whatever. So we start doing that with him. We just start counting. Can you count with Mommy and Daddy? 1. And eventually he'll start counting with you. And then after he's able to count, we take a deep breath together. And I know that sounds so stupid, but
Yeah.
it
No,
calms
that's a
down the
good one.
tantrum. It gives him something to focus on. And recently, in the past like few days, like probably 5 days, if my son sees my husband or I starting to get like irritated or frustrated with something we're doing, he'll come over, he'll run over and he'll touch our leg or our arm or whatever, and he'll say, Mommy, take deep breath. Or Daddy, take deep breath. And it's like, it's just this cutest little reminder, and it really does. It just chills us out. We're like,
But
oh,
yeah,
that's
that
so cute.
shows like, see that he's learning and they pick up on that. It's helpful
Right.
for
And
everybody. Yeah.
yeah, for everybody, because it makes you as the parent, cognizant that your kid is watching everything that you do.
Mm-hmm.
And he's able to remind us, it's okay, just take a deep breath. It'll be okay.
Yeah.
And that the bigger emotions, like this morning, first time it happened, and I really wanted to have a big fit, but I reeled it in because I knew that it was an overreaction. I was sitting reading with my son in the morning. That's what we do. We sit, we read. He has his cup of milk. He might have a snack. Like, that's just what we do for a slow start to the day. My son, our family works with a slow start to the day. And we were sitting in the chair. I was reading. He was hanging out with me. And then just all of a sudden, he started like smacking my shoulder. And I was like, okay, don't hit mommy, whatever. And then he like put his arm over and he just like wound up and straight slapped me in the face. And I was like, excuse you. And I wanted to overreact. And I was like, you do not hit mommy. And you do not slap mommy in the face ever. And he was like really confused because I could tell that he was trying to play and he didn't know what he had done wrong. So by looking at his face, I was like, I need to explain this a little bit more. So I said, you slapping mommy in the face makes mommy sad and mad. So sad, mad. And it makes me not want to play. And he took, like, you could see him thinking and trying to figure out, like, okay, I get it, but like, I don't know why she reacted that way to what I did. And so we actually had like a pretty big talk about hitting people and the way that it makes people feel. And mommy doesn't hit you. Daddy, nobody hits you. So we don't expect you to hit us either. And what's appropriate social interaction.
I like that.
And it was very hard for mommy to keep it together because I wanted to immediately like lose my crap. But I was able to reel that in pretty quick whenever I saw his face. And I was like, he doesn't know what he did. But
yeah.
But working through that as a family and finding a way to verbalize what you're feeling and then figure out why you as the adult are feeling that way.
Yeah.
It's much harder than it sounds.
Oh, it is. Yeah. And then explaining why. Yeah. That made me think too of another thing that sometimes we'll use with students. And again, this might be something, like you said, some things you're going to talk about like after, right? Because in the moment, it might not be the best time. And it depends on like the age and level of the child, but you can, scale some things for various ages. But one of the things that sometimes we'll talk about with students is kind of evaluating problems and talking about like, is this a small problem or a big problem? I mean, you could do like a medium size too. And then, it's probably helpful, you could always just teach that before and then like talk about different examples. Like a small problem would be like, oh, I broke my crayon or something like that. And then a really big problem is an emergency, like I got really hurt or I threw up, something that's like, I need help. And then there might be like medium problems that are like, I don't know, you have to like fix, but it's not an emergency. And then, so then like after something happens, let everyone calm down. And then that would be something like, sometimes we'll talk about with students, like we'll ask the teacher like, okay, how's their day? What's going on? Anything that we should know? And maybe they'll say like, oh, they had this issue with another student. And then we find out why or something. And then we can talk about, okay, do you think that was a big problem or a small problem? And find out why, because sometimes for them, like everything seems like a big problem and then they overreact to everything. And so kind of helping them either understand why that was big to them, because maybe it felt really big to them, or helping them see like, okay, we didn't need to, you didn't have to call your parent. We didn't have to get a teacher. We didn't have to call an ambulance. Like all of those things didn't happen. So, maybe it's a medium problem or something. Sometimes that is a helpful way to kind of put words to things. And then you can use that to kind of be like, okay, so how can we react in that? Because it's, a small problem is going to have a different reaction than a big problem, that sort of thing.
Right.
So yeah, there's lots of ways. I think, like you said, the biggest thing is just starting to talk about it. And like you said, it's hard because like
It's
usually
so
we
hard.
just internalize it and you don't think about how do I explain this to like a young child? And then
Mhm.
when you have to do it, you're like, oh wow. But it's really good for everyone. So
It's
yeah,
very
I like those
therapeutic.
examples.
Like, I was not expecting that end of it. Like, my husband and I agreed, both of our families tend to have a little bit of an anger problem, so we need to make sure that we keep an eye out for that and teach him healthy ways. That way he doesn't have to find out like the rest of us did, like healthy ways to deal with anger problems.
Right.
And so we've been kind of on the lookout for that type of stuff, but really breaking it down. And my husband, I told you, we talked in the first episode that I mentioned that is like your intro episode or whatever, about me working with speech language pathologists for my husband for short-term memory loss and PTSD symptoms.
Right.
And one of the things that they mentioned specifically for his post-traumatic stress was it. I don't know. I don't know if you know it because it's a different type of thing than what you normally do, but there's like these circles within circles, and it was like primary feelings, mad, sad, happy, like that type of stuff, and then peripheral, like
Okay.
actual ways that those emotions can manifest.
Hmm.
So, you know that you're irritated. Okay, why are you irritated? Why is that? Why is that action triggering that reaction from you? And kind of going through this wheel and like lining it up and stuff and figuring out like what the root cause of everything is, and being able to be very specific and very precise in the description of your emotions and why you're feeling those emotions. And it was a really interesting idea, and I really kind of dove into that a little bit just because it was interesting to me. And if people have not heard of that type of thing, there's a ton of them that you can just type in on Pinterest, like emotion wheels or something like that, and they pop up. And it's very, very interesting to look at, okay, this is a secondary emotion, so what's the primary emotion? And then a lot of times the primary, like if I am initially just outraged at something, okay, outrage, anger, yes. Okay, those are secondary emotions. So what's the primary emotion that's causing this outward expression? And it's just, I don't know. I find it very interesting to look at that, and it really helps you know yourself a little bit better. And then it equips me and my husband for being able to help our son from the start a little bit better than most people. But I also found that it actually helps me out a lot with like classroom management and helping my students figure out what is going on with like my private tutoring practice. If they're having anxiety, okay, well, let's look at anxiety. That's a secondary emotion. So what are the primary emotions that could be causing this? So let's really dig into
Yeah.
this, and then I'm able to be more effective as a teacher and a tutor for helping them get
Hmm.
past those emotional hurdles so that they're able to learn. So I don't know.
I like that. Yeah, I feel like that
Yeah.
could be useful, like you said, for yourself, for your students, for your own kids, like figuring out why they're feeling this and digging deeper.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that's
Is
really
that the job
interesting.
of a school? No. But it is. So my point is that it's not just for little kids. It is also effective clear up from birth through death. Essentially, like the whole lifespan, that this is something that can be implemented and effective at whatever level you're at. And you mentioned it is harder the older you get because you have to be a lot more cognizant of what you're actually doing, and it becomes a practice as opposed to just something you do until
Hmm.
it becomes reflex. So
Yeah,
it's easier the younger you start, but it's
to
not
start younger,
impossible to
right?
implement later on. I think.
Hmm. I thought of another tool that now I'm like thinking of these other things. Um, that is something else that could be helpful. So, and this is something that is a lot of times used for with like students who have autism or something like that. but is really beneficial for, you know, a lot of kids, and especially with what we're seeing, like the difficulty navigating social situations or new situations, like if that specifically is hard
Mm-hmm.
because maybe your child was stuck at home. Something called social stories that some people may have heard of or used. I mean, they have ones online, probably some that people have made that you could purchase or download. But then, like, once you get the hang of it, you can just create your own specific to your situation and what you're doing. So,
So what are
um,
those?
it's basically like a story. So it's a social story. It's kind of like a story about a social situation, and you go through it with your child or student before the event. So a lot of
Gotcha. Okay.
times, maybe kids who have a hard time like going to the dentist or getting a haircut, you would find or create a story about doing that thing. Um, so it helps them know what to expect in advance because a lot of it is like fear of the unknown,
Mm-hmm.
or they think like all these bad things are going to happen. And you're kind of saying like, I have a dentist appointment. When I go to the dentist, I go and check in. Then we sit in the waiting room. Then
Mm-hmm.
so it's like a story, but it's about what you are
Oh my
doing.
gosh.
And then like the
I know
dentist will
exactly what
call
you're
me
talking
back.
about. Okay,
So
so
like,
Daniel Tiger, you know. So my toddler is a little bit obsessed with Daniel Tiger. He loves Daniel Tiger,
hmm,
and mommy loves Daniel Tiger too. I love Daniel Tiger so much because they have a whole thing on dentists. They have a whole thing on whenever you're going to the doctor's office, whenever you're
okay,
going to the
yeah,
swimming pool, and it's all of these different. And mom tiger usually does the walkthrough. Dad tiger does sometimes, but
okay,
usually it's mom tiger going through role playing with Daniel's toys about what's going to happen and how they're going to do
okay,
it. And
yeah,
they just posted a new episode on the PBS Kids app about Daniel's going to go to the wedding. He's going to go to a wedding in the neighborhood. And okay, what's going to
okay,
happen at these
yes,
weddings and all that stuff. So that's what you're talking about, is that type of stuff.
yeah. So a lot of times they're like, but I mean, you could do it with role playing like that. A lot of times they're like written, and it might just be like one sentence per page with a picture of like what's
Okay.
happening. But then you can put into it possible scenarios that could happen. I mean, as much as you can, thinking of things that could happen. So like, say you're going to the pool this summer, and because of maybe this is the first summer the pool has been open because of the pandemic, and like your kids don't know what to expect, or
Hmm.
they don't do well, in crowds. So you would, talk about, we're going to go to the pool. First, I'm going to pack this and this. When we get there, um, we will have to put our things in a locker. We'll find a seat. And then you might say, sometimes there aren't any seats available. And it like you're trying to prevent like a meltdown or something because they don't know how to react. So you
Okay.
might say, we might have to wait or put our towels on the ground, but a seat will probably become available later or something like that.
Hmm.
Or we could have a picnic in the grass. Or you might say something like, sometimes when we go to the pool, kids splash me, and I don't like that. Um, so maybe you say something like, when that happens, I like to take a break and, sit on the chair, or I go to the other side of the pool because I
Hmm.
don't like being splashed. Um, or like, we have to put on sunscreen. I don't like how sunscreen feels, but I know that it keeps me safe. Or I have to wear, I have to use a float, or I can only stay in the shallow end, but I really want to go to the deep end. Um, that's why I'm practicing swimming so that I can get better. Or things like trying to think of, so like maybe once you've done it already, you can add more in because you'll know, ooh, this was an issue.
Hmm.
Um, or if you know things that like your child is going to react to. And it's just kind of like a positive way. And it's like, it's not like you're telling, I don't know, if it feels like they know what to expect, and it's not like you're telling them like, that was naughty. You can't
Mm-hmm.
do this. Because a lot of it, like I said, is just they don't know how to
Mm-hmm.
respond or it's overwhelming and too much. So a lot of students who struggle more in social situations, those can be really helpful. And like I said, I feel like it would be helpful for a lot of kids now who haven't done a lot of these things before because everything was closed. But yeah, it sounds very much like what you said with Daniel Tiger, kind of just talking through. I like
Mm-hmm.
that. Now I'll
Daniel
have to
Tiger's
check out that show.
amazing. Sorry. Yeah, that's
Isn't
I
it
actually
like kind of modeled loosely after?
Mr. Rogers'
Uh,
Neighborhood. Yes.
yes, yeah.
Yes. So
Isn't it?
not
Okay, that's
loosely,
what I
it
thought.
is. It
So
is.
it is okay.
So, okay. First, I love I love the social stories. I actually know several adults that do that. That will like prep them. So they have pretty
Yeah.
bad social anxiety, so they'll prep themselves if they're going to like a party that they have to go to for work or something, and they'll say,
Okay.
"Okay, this is
Yeah,
going to
it'd
be
be
the
great
guest
for
list.
adults.
Here's how I interact with these people. This person's going to annoy me, so I'm going to try to avoid them. But at a certain point, they're going to come up to me, and I have to interact with them. So how am I going to do that? That's I know several adults that will do
Hmm.
that, and I just think like it's a little extra, but now that you just explained it, it makes more sense. So
Yeah, and maybe like
yes.
now with all the, there's probably more anxiety or all these things after the pandemic that,
Hmm.
it might be something that more adults would be using.
Would benefit from, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so background sidebar. Background on Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. Okay. So Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood is based around Daniel Tiger, obviously. So for those of you who did not grow up on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, I'm so sorry. You're probably one of those screwed up people. But Mr. Rogers had the neighborhood of make believe. One of the characters was Daniel Tiger. He was a scared tiger that lived in the closet.
Oh, that's
Okay.
right. Okay.
Right. So that
Got
Daniel,
it.
so the show Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood is set in the neighborhood of make believe, and the Daniel Tiger
Okay.
from the original show from Mister Rogers' Neighborhood is little Daniel's dad. And so all of the characters that are little
Okay.
kids or toddlers in the show are the kids of the original characters. So like Lady
Okay.
Elaine has a kid, and
Uh,
X the owl that was like loved books and stuff, he's the librarian, and he has a nephew that lives with him named O. And so they have
oh,
different
gotcha.
types of
Okay.
yeah,
Because
X
isn't
and O
there
L.
like a train too?
The
Like the
trolley.
train that,
Ding ding
the
ding ding.
trolley. Yeah.
Yeah,
They
okay,
would,
so there's a trolley
okay.
song. So the trolley is there's a trolley stop right outside of Daniel's house, and it takes them, hey trolley, can you take us wherever? So
Yeah.
say they're going to the grocery store. So Daniel and his mom or dad will get in the trolley, they'll buckle up, and then they sing the song, we're going to the grocery store to get ourselves some food. Won't you ride along with me? Ride along. Anyways, so by the time they're done with the song, they're where they're going. So we do that all the time.
Okay.
We sing the trolley song all the time. And
Love it.
for potty training, there's a whole thing about where there's a whole episode about Daniel Tiger and potties and how it's okay. There's potties everywhere. There's a potty at school, there's a potty at home, there's a potty at the music shop. And when you have to go potty, stop and go right away. Then flush and wash, you'll be on your way. That's it. That's the whole thing. That was hugely helpful for potty training. And
That's hilarious.
yeah, just silly things like that. And there was one when my nephew was little. All of my nephews are 9 now. They were all born in the same year. But whenever they were small, I would watch Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood with them. And there was one where Daniel Tiger just wanted to give up because it was so frustrating. And the song was try, 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 try again. And that was it. So we sing that song all the time. And just like little songs like that. If we're going to do something new, we'll talk about it, kind of stuff. It's very, I love it. It is very, for somebody that grew up with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and the impact that Fred Rogers had, it is wonderful. They use the same theme songs,
Yeah.
just like with slightly different words and stuff. It's very nice. So I highly suggest it.
Okay. I feel like I've
But
seen like parts of episodes here and there, but
yeah, yeah,
not recently, so.
yeah, definitely worth it. So,
Okay.
and
Good to
anything that
know.
you're going to come up against as a parent, like emotional or behavioral, they
Side note, we're
they
not sponsored by Daniel. I'm
side
just
note, we're
kidding.
not sponsored. God, I would love that. No, we're not sponsored by Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood or affiliated with PBS in any way, shape, or form. Um, but if someone that is involved in that is listening, hey,
Right.
you can hit us up at one-roomeducation.com and hit contact us. They actually have they have a couple episodes. So a teacher's nephew, I think, or yeah, the teacher's nephew has autism. So they talk about like different ways to play with kids with autism and how it might seem weird, but it's just different and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
ton of social stuff.
Oh, that's cool.
It's really cool. So I highly recommend it. Probably through age 6 would benefit from it.
Okay.
So anyways, yeah, we love Daniel Tiger. Anyways, but getting back to the emotional and social stuff, it's very helpful with that type of stuff, and it reminds you as a parent what you need to do, because mom and dad Tiger demonstrate it very well for you. So break it down. Anywho, so is there anything else that you want to make sure to add when it comes to the COVID issues specifically? Because getting hard turn back around to the topic of this talk, it is difficult for parents and teachers to explain to kids why they can or can't do something when the parents don't have a say over it. So whenever policy, or the teachers, when new policies are made or new laws are passed, and the parents or teachers just have to deal with it. And we talked about in the first episode with you that you have a lot of the bureaucratic red tape that you have to deal with too. And explaining that and figuring out ways to work within those constraints to actually be effective to help students. So do you have any other suggestions or any last minute thoughts on ways that we can help our students specifically with the new learning gaps and everything that are being found from your perspective?
Well, I feel like I don't know. I mean, you said earlier about like the increase in homeschooling. And it's not, I don't know. It's not like this is, I'm not saying everyone has to homeschool, but I think this is like an opportunity for, like, in trying to paint it in a positive light, this is an opportunity for parents to kind of like, I don't know, take a chance to evaluate, um, like, I don't know, the school, the methods being used, their kids' education, and like if they want to make some changes, like I feel like now's the perfect time to do that. And or like the time to recognize that you have a voice as a parent and you can speak up or get involved, and make sure like you know what's going on, that the school is communicating. Because sometimes, I don't know if parents are always aware of these things that, I guess some of it is just coming out, but parents may not always be aware of these gaps.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, it's your child, even though they are, like, if they are at school a lot of the day, like you should know what's going on. And so, um, I don't know. I think just again, I feel like I always come back to this like hopefully we can make you feel empowered to, and teachers too, like make sure that you are communicating with parents and making sure, you know, you teachers got into that to help students and like, just like keep that in mind that um what's the best way you can do that and communicate that with parents so that everyone can just yeah, make the choices that they need to. And sometimes that means a hard choice, but
And
yeah.
I've seen that a lot because, like I said, currently at the time of recording this episode, it is the first day of June and it's the end of the school year. And I've seen a mind-boggling number of teachers that are posting that they're just not going to be back next year. And the reasonings vary depending on the teacher and where they are and everything. But the amount of bullying, I would say, from other educators that I'm seeing on these posts about how, oh, only the strong survive. You must not have been tough enough. You must have been a shitty teacher anyways. Like, whatever. You and I both know that that's not the case. That we are losing outstanding, amazing teachers because of the COVID policies that were put in place, because of a lack of enforcement on a lot of things and making the hard decision. I don't think that people understand what a hard decision it is to leave a classroom, to leave the education profession, because the amount of guilt that is put on you by society for doing what's best for you and your family, but you're leaving all those kids. Those kids need you more than your own kids do. Those kids need you more than your family needs you. What about them what about the kids that don't have a family? Think about them. And they put so much pressure on you that you're responsible for the entirety of a broken system. And I think it's just really sad to see what social media is doing to these teachers and the way that they're painting them. And if these teachers are leaving the classroom to go and help make these education policies, specifically, I've seen a few of those where they're leaving the education field to go and become essentially lobbyists for education policy. You should read the comments on those people's posts and about, those who can't teach and those who can't teach become lobbyists and just like all kinds of stuff. And I have seen this person's content for quite a while, and they're actually a very effective teacher. Like, if you're looking technically, they're very good teachers, but they cannot teach and educate within the current system. So they're going to leave that system and try to make it better legally. So
which we need people to do that too. So
yeah, we need people. We need good people that want to help create education policy. We can't just have politicians doing it. And I think that that's something that people don't really realize. And I talk about this all the time. One room education as a entity advocates for home-based education when possible. And there are so many options that aren't homeschooling, that aren't exclusively homeschooling, that you can do with your kids to get them out of a system that you think is failing them, or you think that they deserve something maybe a little bit different, or something else would be more effective for your student. Look at the options you have. You have private schools, which a lot of states are implementing education savings accounts where the money follows the kid, not the district. So you could get at least half off of that plus grants and stuff to send your kid to a private school. It takes a little bit more work, but you'll be able to do it. There are charter schools, which are free of cost. A lot of times we have a couple articles on that topic over on the website. There's something called micro schools. I don't know how much you've heard about those, but they don't usually take more than like 15 kids at a time, and they usually focus around very specific topics. So you drop your kid off like you do at a regular school. There is a private tuition that is usually involved, but if you live in a state with an education savings account, it can help offset that cost. It's essentially like being a homeschooler and putting out the money yourself for that, but you have somebody else teach your kid instead of you doing it. So it's a lot closer to a traditional education experience here in the US, but much smaller class sizes, like you and I have talked about. That episode will be coming out very soon about classroom sizes and the effect that it has on your kids' education. So micro schools might be a good option for you. There's pod learning, there's cooperative learning if you want to do homeschooling. There are so many options out there besides public school, private school. There are so many other options that parents can look at. And I think that your family and your student, I think with these numbers coming out, I think that's a really good point, that this might be the opportune time to dive into those and look at them and maybe make a change for your student. And as a parent, it is not your job to sacrifice your entire life, but it is your job to sacrifice your comfort for your children. And if sending your kid to a micro school or sending your kid to a different school is slightly inconvenient for you and you just don't want that kind of inconvenience, then maybe you shouldn't have had a kid. So, sorry. It's your responsibility. If you want a full deep dive about that, I did an entire episode in season 1 called Your Kids Need You, Parental Responsibilities in Education. I will make sure that is linked in the notes and description for this episode if you want to hear about what your responsibilities are as a parent and ways that you can step up to make your child's education actually more effective and make your life actually easier in the process. All right, so thank you to Amanda. As always, it was a fabulous discussion, and I love talking to you, and I'm so excited to meet the little one when they finally come.
Me too.
And if you're enjoying listening to Amanda and I have these conversations and these kind of deep dive talks about different issues in regard to education, please make sure that you are following us on whichever platform you happen to be listening to us on. It really does help. And if you want to stay abreast of everything that's going on here at One Room Education and get some behind the scenes content and get some just kind of random thoughts from me and the staff, please make sure to follow us over on our social medias. On Facebook, Rumble, and YouTube, we are at One Room Education, all one word. If you enjoy this content, please head over to one-roomeducation.com. Again, that's the word one, ONE-roomeducation.com. And you can find all of the past episodes of The State of Education with full notes and references there, as well as all of the articles from our blog. And if you would like to stay up to date without having to check back in on the website, please put in your name and address on those pop-ups to get One Room content straight to your inbox so you don't have to keep checking back. You're welcome for the convenience. So thank you so much, Amanda, for joining us today. As always, it is always a pleasure.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today as Amanda and I discussed the state of education. We'll see you next time.